wind howled across the Dawson Ranch like an angry spirit, rattling shutters and sending snow swirling in chaotic patterns across the frozen fields. Inside, the temperature was barely better. Clara Dawson, 23, stood in the small kitchen, her hands trembling not from the cold, but from the tension that had been building all day, ever since her father had died. Her stepmother Martha had made it clear that Clara's presence was tolerated only as long as she was useful, working the ranch from dawn until dusk, tending to chores that her stepbrothers ignored, feeding animals, mending fences, and scrubbing floors until her knuckles bled. Tonight had been different. Tonight, Clara had made a mistake so small it should have been inconsequential, but in Martha's eyes, it was a challenge to her authority. Clara had dared to refuse a task, fetching a crate of traps from the creek miles away in the middle of a blizzard. Her voice, soft and timid, had carried a hint of defiance. "You live here for free," Martha snapped, her eyes burning with a cold fire that mirrored the winter storm outside. "I work harder than anyone," Clara replied, barely loud enough to hear herself. Martha's face twisted in fury. "Ungrateful little—" Before she could finish, Clara's heart sank as Martha stormed closer and shoved her toward the door. "You'll learn respect the hard way," she spat. "Out you go." Clara barely had time to react before the door slammed shut behind her, cutting her off from the warmth and safety of the home she had helped sustain for years. The storm hit her immediately, a biting, relentless wall of cold that whipped snow into her eyes, biting at every inch of exposed skin. She stumbled on the porch, her boots slipping on the icy boards, and called out to the stepbrothers, to anyone inside. But there was no answer. The door was wedged with a chair, the house silent except for the storm's furious cries. Clara's mind raced. For the first time in her life, she felt entirely alone, abandoned not by circumstance, but by the family she had once trusted. She could see the darkened outline of the road ahead, barely distinguishable through the swirling white, and her body reacted before her mind could fully process the danger. She had to move, one foot in front of the other, into the storm, into the unknown. The wind tore at her thin wool shawl, ripping it away, exposing her bare arms to the icy fury. Her boots sank into the deepening snow, each step a monumental effort. Her breath came in ragged, stinging gasps, turning to mist in the freezing air. The storm seemed alive, a monstrous entity determined to swallow her whole. Clara tried to focus, whispering to herself, one foot, then the other, keep going. Memories flickered through her mind, the warmth of her father's embrace, his laughter echoing in the barn, the stories he read to her by the fire when she was a little girl. She clung to those memories as though they were a lifeline. Hours, or maybe minutes, time had lost meaning, passed. Clara's body began to betray her. Her legs felt disconnected from her core, numb and unresponsive. Fingers stiffened into ice-cold claws, refusing to bend. Her lips had lost all feeling, and each inhale sent searing pain through her lungs. When she finally fell, it was not to the ground itself, but into a soft mound of snow that swallowed her partially, numbing her further. She tried to push herself up, but her arms were uncooperative. Panic began to claw at her, but it was muffled beneath the storm's roar. She curled into herself instinctively, shivering uncontrollably, seeking any remnant of warmth she could generate. Her eyes drifted shut, and the memories of her father's comforting presence took over. She imagined she was a little girl again, tucked into bed, safe from the harsh world outside. But Clara's near-frozen body could not escape the reality of the storm. She lay there, half buried in snow, her breath shallow, her heartbeat uneven. Each moment was a battle between consciousness and the creeping numbness threatening to claim her entirely. Unbeknownst to her, someone had seen her struggling through the storm. A figure appeared through the blizzard, moving with purpose. It was tall, strong, a cowboy, bundled against the cold, but moving with a grace that suggested experience and familiarity with danger. He spotted her stumbling figure and dismounted swiftly, his boots crunching against the snow. "Miss, are you all right?" he called, voice carrying over the wind. Clara's eyelids fluttered open weakly, barely registering the presence of another human. A shadow leaned over her, hands lifting her gently from the snow. His touch was like fire against her frozen skin, the first warmth she had felt in what seemed like hours. "You're half frozen," he muttered, checking her pulse with a practiced urgency. "Hold on, I got you." Clara could not speak. Words failed her, the cold stealing her ability to form them. She only clung to his strength as he wrapped his coat around her, shielding her body from the storm as best he could. The horse he had ridden stood quietly nearby, snorting in the wind, ready to move. The cowboy hoisted her onto the horse, pressing her close to his chest. She felt the solid warmth of him through layers of wool and leather, smelled the faint scent of smoke and pine clinging to his coat, and felt a tiny spark of hope ignite in the icy despair around her. "You're going to be all right," he murmured again, leaning close so that she could hear his heartbeat. "Just stay with me." Clara's world narrowed to the rhythm of his heart and the motion of the horse beneath them. Snow whipped past in a blur, and the storm raged as if to challenge him, but he remained undeterred, shielding her, guiding them forward. For the first time in hours, Clara felt the raw edge of terror soften into something like safety. As the journey continued, her mind drifted. She wondered who he was, why he had come, and if she would survive the night. But the warmth, the firmness of his grip, and the steady sound of hooves on snow gave her a fragile sense of security. She allowed herself to sink into the quiet of trust, even as the storm continued to howl around them. By the time they reached the small cabin where he would bring her, Clara was exhausted beyond measure. Yet even in her semi-conscious state, she sensed the difference between the cold cruelty of her stepmother and the unexpected compassion of this stranger. He had saved her, not just from the storm, but from the despair that had settled over her life like a heavy shroud. He helped her inside, setting her by the fire, removing her soaked layers and wrapping her in blankets. The warmth seeped into her slowly, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Clara could relax. She felt her fingers slowly regain their movement, her lips tingling back to life, and her body gradually thawing from near-fatal cold. The cowboy did not leave her side, fetching a cup of hot tea, checking her temperature, and offering small words of reassurance. "You're going to be all right," he said once more, as if repeating it would convince not only her, but also the storm-weary world outside. In that moment, Clara realized something profound. For all the cruelty she had endured, for all the nights she had spent shivering alone in the world, there was still kindness in it. Sometimes it came from unexpected strangers, from hands willing to lift her when she could not lift herself. She did not know his name yet, nor did she know if he would remain in her life after the storm passed. But in that frozen night, Clara felt the first flicker of hope in months. The storm outside continued its relentless assault, but inside the cabin, surrounded by blankets, fire, and the presence of the man who had found her at her lowest, Clara understood that she was no longer alone. She had survived the storm, both outside and within, and for the first time in years, she felt the fragile but undeniable warmth of human care. The cabin sat nestled in a small clearing, surrounded by towering pines weighed down by snow. Its wooden walls, though modest and weathered, radiated warmth, a stark contrast to the brutal storm outside. Inside, the fire roared in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the room. Clara Dawson had never been so aware of heat in her life. Every inch of her body tingled as the warmth seeped into her frozen limbs. She shivered against the blankets, the faint tremor of shock still coursing through her. The cowboy, whose name she still did not know, moved quietly about the cabin. He was methodical, yet gentle, as he tended to her. He poured a cup of hot tea, the steam curling upward and carrying the faint smell of herbs and roasted grain. Then he knelt beside her, holding the cup with hands that were both strong and steady. "Drink slowly," he instructed, his voice calm, with a quiet authority that seemed to command not just her attention, but her trust. "It'll help warm you from the inside out." Clara lifted the cup, her hands trembling as the heat bit into her numbed fingers. She sipped carefully, letting the warmth flood her chest. The sensation was intoxicating. She felt her body respond almost immediately, blood moving again to places that had long been numb. Her lips tingled with new life. Her breath became steadier, more confident. For the first time since being cast into the storm, she felt hope that she might survive the night. The cowboy watched her closely, noting every subtle shiver and shudder. "You're lucky," he said finally, a hint of awe in his voice. "Most folks wouldn't have made it out there." Clara lowered the cup, her eyes meeting his for the first time fully. She studied his face, strong jaw, weathered skin, eyes like polished amber, and a quiet intensity that made her heart beat faster. There was no judgment in him, only concern, and that was a feeling Clara had almost forgotten existed. "I thank you," she whispered, her voice weak but sincere. "I don't even know your name." "Name's Ethan," he replied simply. "Ethan Harper. You can call me Harper if you like, but I reckon Ethan works fine." Clara nodded, letting the warmth of his presence and the fire settle her nerves. She tried to remember how to speak in full sentences, but words felt heavy in her frost-bitten mouth. Harper didn't rush her, didn't insist on conversation. He moved around the cabin with quiet efficiency, stacking firewood, checking the latch on the door against the wind, making sure the small stove in the corner was functioning properly. Every action conveyed a kind of competence and care that made her feel safe for the first time in months. Minutes passed, the storm outside showing no sign of relenting. Yet inside, Clara began to recover. Her muscles, once stiff and unyielding, slowly loosened as warmth replaced the numbness. Her body ached from exposure, but the pain was a reminder that she was alive. She sipped more tea, her strength returning incrementally, each swallow a triumph over the icy grip that had nearly claimed her. Harper finally sat across from her, boots resting near the fire, hands clasped over his knees. He studied her for a long moment before speaking. I don't know what you were doing out there in a storm like that, but whatever it was, it sure wasn't safe. Clara's eyes dropped to her lap. My stepmother, she began, voice trembling. She forced me out. Said I had to walk. Said I had to earn respect. I didn't know where else to go. Harper's gaze softened. He leaned forward slightly. That's cruel, he said, his tone low and steady. No one deserved that. You didn't deserve to be out there alone. Not in weather like that. And certainly not treated like you did. Tears pricked at Clara's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Instead, she focused on the fire, on the heat creeping through her fingers and toes, on the steady, reassuring presence of the man who had saved her. She realized then that her life up to this point had been a series of quiet sufferings, endured silently, because she believed she had no other choice. But here, with Harper, she glimpsed a different possibility: protection, care, and perhaps even kindness. Hours passed in quiet conversation and companionable silence. Harper gave her food, a simple stew warmed by the fire, and she found her appetite slowly returning. She spoke sparingly, answering his questions, revealing fragments of her life, careful not to show too much vulnerability. Yet each word brought a small relief, a shedding of the heavy weight of isolation and fear she had carried for years. At one point, the storm seemed to abate slightly, a lull that allowed the snow to settle and the wind to ease. Harper moved to the window, peering out into the white wilderness. He sighed, his breath fogging the glass. It's a long night still, he said, but you'll make it. I'll make sure of that. Clara felt an unfamiliar sensation: trust. She realized she was no longer afraid, not entirely. Her body still ached, her mind still whirred with confusion and fear. But Harper's presence created a protective bubble, shielding her from the storm outside and the emotional tempest she had endured for so long. As the night deepened, Harper prepared a place for her to rest near the fire, a pile of blankets that seemed impossibly soft compared to the frozen ground outside. Try to sleep, he said gently. You need to recover your strength. The storm isn't over, and neither is the journey ahead. Clara lay down, the warmth sinking into her bones, and allowed herself to surrender to sleep. For the first time in months, perhaps years, she slept without fear of being shoved back into the cold, without the constant anxiety of cruelty and neglect pressing on her chest. Harper remained nearby, tending to the fire, ensuring the cabin remained safe. And in that simple act, he communicated more care than words ever could. Throughout the night, Clara dreamed, not of storms, nor of fear, but of simple things. A warm hand in hers, the scent of pine, laughter that echoed through open fields, and the gentle, steadfast presence of someone who would not abandon her. When she awoke the next morning, she felt weak, yes, but alive. And more importantly, she felt seen, protected, and for the first time, capable of imagining a life where she might not always have to endure suffering alone. Ethan Harper, the cowboy who had found her on the brink of death, remained there, a silent guardian and perhaps the first person who had ever truly cared for her well-being. In that cabin, surrounded by the lingering traces of the storm, Clara understood that survival was not just about enduring the elements. It was about being sheltered by those willing to give warmth, trust, and protection when the world had turned against you. The snow outside glistened under the morning sun, untouched and blindingly white. For Clara, it was no longer a symbol of fear, but a testament to the night she had survived, and to the stranger who had become her lifeline. As the day began, she knew that whatever challenges awaited, she would face them not alone, but with someone who had already proven that humanity could be a source of comfort, strength, and hope. The first light of dawn filtered through the frost-lined windows of the cabin, painting the small room in soft golds and whites. Outside, the world was blanketed in snow. Every branch, every field, every frozen puddle glowing with winter's quiet beauty. Inside, warmth still radiated from the fire, and Clara Dawson lay on the makeshift bed of blankets, her body slowly regaining strength. She had slept for hours, the first uninterrupted rest she could remember in months. And though her muscles ached and her lips were still chapped, she felt a sense of calm she hadn't known for years. Ethan Harper moved quietly across the cabin, the sound of his boots muffled against the rough floorboards. He tended the fire, adding kindling with practiced precision, checking the stove, and ensuring that the small cabin was secure against the lingering storm outside. His movements were deliberate and steady, but there was a softness in his attention to Clara that spoke volumes. Clara watched him from the blankets, the shadows of the fire flickering across his face. She noticed the lines etched by years of hard work, the calluses on his hands, the way his eyes scanned the room with careful attention, never overlooking her needs. He wasn't just a stranger who had saved her. He was a man who seemed to understand the fragility of life in this harsh world. Someone who knew how to offer protection without demanding anything in return. "Morning," he said finally, his voice low and gentle. "Sleep well?" Clara nodded, her throat dry, her lips chapped, but her voice steady. "Yes, better than I have in a long time." Ethan glanced at her with a faint smile. "Good. You needed it. You were close to, well, closer than anyone should ever be out in a storm like that." He paused, then added, "You're stronger than I thought, though." Most folks would have frozen solid in half the time. Clara felt a mixture of embarrassment and gratitude. I thought I was ready," she admitted. "But I wasn't. Not at all." "That's all right," he said softly. "No one's ready for a blizzard like last night. But you're here now, and you're going to be all right." There was a pause, filled with the quiet sounds of the cabin, the crackling fire, the soft whistle of wind outside, the occasional creak of timber as the cabin settled. Clara felt the weight of the night pressing down on her, the exhaustion of her ordeal mingling with a growing curiosity about this man who had rescued her. "Why? Why did you help me?" she asked cautiously, almost afraid of the answer. Ethan looked at her, his amber eyes steady and sincere. He sat down near the blankets, leaning slightly forward. "Because someone had to," he said simply. "I've been out in storms like that, plenty of times. Seen folks caught in the snow and nearly lost. I can't just ride past and do nothing. Not when I can help." Clara studied him, noting the quiet intensity of his gaze, the honesty in his voice. She realized that this wasn't about heroics or showmanship. This was about a man who understood suffering, who recognized vulnerability and acted without hesitation. She felt a strange mix of awe and relief, and for the first time, she allowed herself to consider that perhaps the world wasn't entirely cruel. "Ethan," she began hesitantly, you could have left me out there. You didn't have to." "I know," he replied, "but I couldn't. I've seen what happens when people are left to fend for themselves in weather like that. I couldn't let it happen to you, not if I could do something." The intensity of his words, the raw honesty, created a quiet moment between them. The cabin, small and simple as it was, became a sanctuary. Clara felt the tension in her chest ease slightly, replaced by a sense of connection she hadn't known she could feel. She realized that for the first time in her life, someone cared enough to put her safety above everything else. Pause. Ethan's gaze softened. "I should probably explain a bit about myself," he said, almost as if he had read her thoughts. "I'm not just a cowboy passing through. I run a small ranch nearby, mostly cattle and horses. Life's hard, but it's honest work. And I've been through storms myself, seen folks frozen, families destroyed, people left to suffer when no one came." Clara listened intently, her curiosity growing with every word. I never knew anyone like that," she admitted quietly. "No one ever really cared before. Not like this." Ethan smiled faintly, but there was a shadow behind his eyes, a memory of hardship. "Caring isn't always easy," he said. "Sometimes it puts you at risk. Sometimes you wonder if it's worth it. But when it comes down to it, if you can help someone survive, even just a little, then it's worth it." They sat in silence for a few moments, the crackling fire filling the space between words. Clara felt an unfamiliar sense of peace, a quiet hope blossoming inside her. She realized that in the midst of despair, she had found not only safety, but understanding. Ethan's presence was a lifeline, and the realization made her heart pound in her chest, not just from gratitude, but from something deeper, something unspoken that she wasn't yet ready to name. "You saved me," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to ever repay you." "You don't need to," Ethan said firmly. "Seeing you warm, safe, and alive, that's enough for me. You don't owe me anything, Clara. Just take care of yourself." Her name on his lips sounded different, intimate in a way that startled her. She felt a flush rise in her cheeks. For all the suffering she had endured, for all the loneliness and fear, hearing her own name spoken with such care was almost overwhelming. Ethan noticed the subtle change, the way her eyes lingered on his face, the slight tremor in her hands. He offered a small, reassuring smile. "You've been through a lot," he said. "It's going to take time to recover, but you're not alone anymore. Not if I can help it." The day passed slowly. Harper tended to the fire, brought her more food, and encouraged her to rest while he handled small chores in and around the cabin. They spoke little, but each glance, each small act of kindness built a bridge of trust between them. Clara realized that her world had expanded in a single night, from isolation, fear, and abandonment, to warmth, safety, and a fledgling connection she had never known was possible. As the evening approached, Harper finally allowed himself to relax beside her on the blankets. "There's something I need to tell you," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on the fire. "I don't often do this, help someone and just ride away. I don't want you to be alone again. If you can, I want you to come with me, back to my ranch. You'll be safe, you'll be cared for, and you won't have to face storms like that on your own." Clara's heart skipped a beat. The thought of leaving everything behind, the house that had never felt like home, the stepmother who had caused her so much pain, was terrifying. Yet the promise of safety, warmth, and companionship was irresistible. She met his gaze and saw the sincerity there, the unwavering commitment to protect her. She began, voice trembling. "I don't know if I can trust that. I've I've been hurt before." "I know," he said softly. "I can't promise the world's perfect, but I can promise this. You won't face it alone. Not while I'm here. And if you choose to come with me, I'll make sure you're never left out in a storm again, literal or otherwise." Clara felt tears prick her eyes, not of fear, but of relief. She had endured so much, and finally, for the first time, she felt the possibility of a life where someone cared enough to shield her from the world's cruelty. She nodded slowly. "I think I'd like that," she said. Ethan offered his hand, and she took it, feeling the warmth and strength of his grip. In that simple act, the boundaries of fear, loneliness, and suffering began to dissolve, replaced by trust, hope, and a tentative but powerful connection. The storm outside had subsided slightly, but inside the cabin, a new kind of warmth blossomed. It wasn't just the fire or the blankets. It was the knowledge that Clara Dawson had survived the night not alone, but with someone who had proven that human kindness, courage, and care could still exist in a harsh, unforgiving world. And as they sat together in the fading light of evening, Clara realized that she had found more than a protector. She had found the first glimmer of family, companionship, and perhaps, in time, love. The morning after Clara's first night in Ethan Harper's cabin dawned crisp and clear. The storm finally spent, leaving the landscape sparkling with fresh snow under a pale winter sun. For the first time in days, Clara felt the subtle thrill of possibility as she prepared to leave the small cabin that had sheltered her from the storm. The journey to Ethan's ranch was not far in distance, but in experience, it represented a monumental step. A step away from her past of cruelty and neglect, and a step towards something uncertain, yet filled with promise. Ethan had been patient, waiting for Clara to regain her strength before insisting she travel. He had packed warm blankets, a satchel of provisions, and a pair of spare gloves. His careful planning reassured her, though a flicker of anxiety danced in her chest. She was venturing into a new life, placing her trust entirely in a man she had met only 2 nights ago. Yet the memory of his hands lifting her from the snow, the warmth of his coat wrapped around her frozen body, and the unwavering dedication in his amber eyes gave her courage. "You ready?" Ethan asked, his tone calm, but carrying a quiet encouragement. His horse, a tall, sturdy chestnut, pawed at the snow impatiently, eager to be on the move. Clara nodded, gripping the blankets around her shoulders. "I think so," she said softly, her voice still carrying the faint rasp of the frostbite and stress from the storm. He offered her a reassuring smile. "Take it slow. I'll be right here. You're not alone in this." Mounting the horse was an awkward task for Clara, her muscles stiff and uncoordinated from the past days of near-frozen immobility. Ethan helped her carefully, guiding her into the saddle and ensuring the blankets kept her warm. For a moment, she felt suspended between fear and hope, trembling with the strange cocktail of nerves and anticipation. The journey began slowly, the horse's hooves crunching in the fresh snow. The air was crisp, and each breath burned in Clara's lungs, but it was invigorating in a way she hadn't felt in years. As they rode through the forest, the snow glistening in the early sunlight, she began to notice the world around her. The subtle sway of branches heavy with frost, the distant mountains gleaming in icy blue, and the tracks of animals that had braved the storm. Ethan spoke little, letting the silence fill the gaps with its quiet comfort. When he did speak, it was with gentle guidance and subtle observation. "Watch your footing if you need to dismount," he said, noticing Clara's occasional discomfort in the saddle. "The snow is soft, but hidden ice can be tricky." Clara nodded, appreciating the care he took, not just in guiding the horse, but in watching over her. She realized that unlike her past experiences, Ethan wasn't waiting for her to fail or stumble. He was ensuring she succeeded, encouraging her growth rather than criticizing her. It was a foreign but deeply reassuring sensation. As they traveled, Clara's curiosity about Ethan grew. How did you learn to survive out here?" she asked hesitantly, her voice carrying over the soft crunch of snow beneath the horse. Ethan chuckled softly, the sound warm and grounded. "Grew up on a ranch mostly. Learned early that nature doesn't wait for anyone, and that people have to look out for each other or get left behind. My father taught me that if you can help someone survive a storm, feed them when they're hungry, or give them a warm place to sleep, you do it. Doesn't matter who they are." Clara absorbed his words, sensing a quiet philosophy behind his actions. She thought of the contrast to her stepmother's cruelty, to the indifference she had endured. Ethan's approach to life seemed simple, yet profound. A mix of practical wisdom and genuine care for others. It was the first time in her life she felt the possibility that kindness could exist without expectation, that protection could be freely offered. Hours passed, the snow shifting from thick powder to slightly firmer drifts as the day progressed. Clara's muscles began to loosen, her body acclimating to the movement of the horse. They encountered patches of frozen stream, trees bent low with ice, and occasional deer tracks. Ethan pointed out safe paths, showing her subtle signs in the snow that she would have overlooked on her own. He taught her how to read the landscape, how to anticipate dangers in the winter wilderness, and how to rely not just on him, but on her own senses. It was during a brief stop at a small clearing, the sun high in the sky, that the depth of their connection became clearer. Ethan dismounted first, helping Clara down with care. "Stretch a bit," he said. "You'll thank me later." Clara bent awkwardly, her muscles tight from both the cold and the recent trauma. She noticed the way Ethan watched her, not with impatience, not with critique, but with a kind of protective attentiveness. He was not just her savior. He was her companion, guiding her through unfamiliar terrain, both literally and emotionally. You really care, don't you?" she asked quietly, half to herself. Ethan paused, meeting her gaze with an intensity that made her stomach flutter. "I do," he admitted. "I've seen what it's like to be left out in the cold. Not just storms, but life. People can be cruel, and I've learned that sometimes the best you can do is be the one who cares. You don't have to face it alone." Clara felt a surge of gratitude, mingled with a fragile, tentative hope. She realized that in this man's care, she was finding not only physical safety, but emotional sanctuary. For the first time in her life, she could imagine a future where she wasn't at the mercy of others' cruelty, where trust could be given and returned, where kindness was not a rare commodity, but a living, breathing reality. As they continued the journey, the terrain grew more challenging. A small hill rose before them, the snow slick and packed with ice in patches. Ethan led the horse carefully, guiding Clara with a firm hand. The climb was slow, each step deliberate, each hoof placement measured. When they reached the top, the view stretched endlessly before them. Fields of white, mountains in the distance, the sun casting a golden glow over the frozen landscape. Clara gasped, the beauty of it taking her breath away. It's incredible," she whispered. Ethan nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "It's a hard world," he said, "but there's beauty if you know where to look. Sometimes you just have to survive the storm to see it." The words resonated deeply. Clara realized that the journey to the ranch was more than just a physical trek. It was symbolic of her passage from despair to hope, from fear to trust, from isolation to connection. Each step, each mile, each moment of guidance and care from Ethan reinforced a bond that neither the storm nor her past could break. By late afternoon, the ranch came into view, a sprawling property of rolling fields, wooden fences, and distant barns. Smoke rose from chimneys, curling lazily into the clear sky. Clara's heart swelled at the sight. It was not just a destination, but a promise of warmth, protection, and a new beginning. Ethan guided the horse through the gates, helping Clara down once more. "Welcome home," he said simply, his voice carrying both pride and reassurance. For Clara, the journey had been transformative. The snowstorm, the cold, the fear, and the darkness were behind her now, replaced by sunlight, warmth, and a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. And standing there, hand in hand with the man who had rescued her, she understood that her life was on the threshold of something entirely new, something that promised not just survival, but hope, care, and perhaps the beginning of love. The ranch stretched before Clara Dawson, like a world reborn, vast and open, washed in the soft glow of late afternoon sun. The snow that had once been the harbinger of fear and near death now sparkled like diamonds across the fields, fences, and roofs of the barns. Clara stood at the edge of the corral, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp air, and felt the extraordinary weight of possibility. For the first time in her life, she was not running from cruelty, from danger, from a world that had repeatedly punished her existence. She was stepping into care, into safety, and into a life where she could belong. Ethan Harper, the man who had rescued her from the blizzard, approached with a warm, steady stride. His tall figure cut a comforting silhouette against the snow-dusted barn, and the way he carried himself, practical, confident, kind, instilled in her a sense of stability she had never known. "You've done well," he said, his voice calm, grounded, yet carrying a subtle pride. "The storm's behind us now, but there's work to do. You'll need to get used to this life if you're going to stay." Clara blinked, letting the reality sink in. "Stay?" she repeated, a mixture of surprise and cautious hope coloring her tone. Ethan smiled, a soft, reassuring curl of his lips. "I didn't just bring you here to survive the storm. I want you to be part of this place. You've got strength, courage, and heart, the things this ranch and life in general needs. You can't spend your life running anymore. You need roots, and, well, if you'll let me, I'd like you to put them here." Her chest tightened, tears prickling her eyes, not from sadness, but from the sudden, overwhelming awareness that she had been given a chance few ever received, a chance to belong, to heal, to start over. She had spent years hidden under the weight of neglect, isolation, and abuse, always small, always cautious. And now, for the first time, she could envision herself not just surviving, but living. The next days passed with a rhythm both grounding and gentle. Ethan taught her the routines of the ranch, feeding the horses, checking fences, tending the livestock, and managing the small farmstead tasks that ensured survival through winter and beyond. Each morning, Clara rose with the sun, her muscles sore but her heart lighter, and each evening she returned to the warmth of the main cabin, her spirit growing stronger with every small accomplishment. She learned the ways of the land, the feel of a horse beneath her, the scent of hay and wood smoke mingling in the cold air, the subtle signs of weather shifts in the clouds and wind. Each new skill, each tiny success, bolstered her confidence. She found joy in simple things: the rhythmic sound of water flowing in the trough, the warmth of the sun on her back, the quiet moments of companionship she shared with Ethan. Ethan, in turn, revealed pieces of himself. He was not a man defined by bravado or heroics, but by consistency, reliability, and quiet strength. He shared stories of his childhood on the ranch, of storms weathered, of nights spent tending livestock in sub-zero temperatures. Clara listened, fascinated not just by the tales, but by the calm resilience with which he had faced hardship. She realized that his courage was different from her stepmother's cruelty. It was measured, intentional, and rooted in care for others. Over time, trust deepened into something more delicate, more profound. Clara found herself laughing freely for the first time in years, sharing thoughts and fears she had long buried, and discovering a comfort in Ethan's presence that she had never known. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sharing warm food and quiet conversation, the cabin filled with the unspoken intimacy of two people who had survived both literal and emotional storms together. One particular evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of amber and violet, Ethan spoke with a sincerity that made Clara's heart flutter. "You've been through so much," he said gently, "more than anyone should. And yet here you are, alive, strong, standing. I want to make sure you never have to face that kind of danger or cruelty again. Not on my watch." Clara's hands, resting on her lap, trembled slightly. I never thought anyone would care like that. Not really," she whispered. "Not after everything I've endured." Ethan reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his touch tender but steady. "Then let me show you," he said. "Let me prove that trust isn't broken beyond repair, that kindness isn't a fleeting thing, that you can have a place where you belong." Tears slipped down her cheeks, and for the first time in her life, they were not tears of fear or pain, but of release, of gratitude, of hope. She realized that survival alone was not enough. She needed connection, stability, and care. And here, at the ranch, she had found it. Days turned into weeks, and the harsh bite of winter began to soften into early signs of spring. The snow melted from the fields, revealing the promise of growth and renewal beneath. Clara flourished alongside the land, her confidence blossoming as she became an integral part of the ranch's daily rhythm. She tended to the animals with skill and patience, learned the rhythms of planting and tending, and discovered that she could take pride in her work, her efforts visible in the thriving ranch around her. Ethan remained a steady presence, guiding her without dominance, supporting her without smothering. Their relationship grew organically, rooted in mutual respect, trust, and shared experience. There were quiet moments of laughter, gentle teasing, and the kind of comfortable silence that comes only when two people truly understand one another. One evening, as they repaired a fence together in the golden light of late afternoon, Ethan paused, looking at Clara with an intensity that made her heart race. "You've come a long way," he said. From that night in the storm, To hear, you've shown more courage than most ever do, and I'm proud of you. Clara felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun. I couldn't have done it without you, she admitted. You didn't just save me from the storm. You saved me from myself, from fear, from feeling like I didn't belong anywhere. Ethan reached for her hand, holding it gently. Then let's make sure you never feel that way again. Not ever. In that moment, the ranch, the land, and the sky around them seemed to mirror the change within her. Clara Dawson, once forced into a storm by cruelty and neglect, now stood firmly in the warmth of care, protection, and possibility. The darkness of her past had given way to light, the harshness of her previous life replaced by the steady, comforting presence of someone who had chosen to see her value, her strength, and her heart. As spring approached, new life appeared not just in the fields and pastures, but within Clara herself. She laughed more freely, moved with confidence, and embraced the responsibilities of ranch life with a sense of purpose. Ethan remained at her side, both guide and companion, his presence a constant reminder that she was no longer alone in the world. And in the quiet evenings, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and painted the snow-melt fields with amber and rose, Clara finally allowed herself to believe in the future. A future filled not with fear or abandonment, but with warmth, trust, and the gentle possibility of love. She had endured the storm, survived its biting fury, and now, for the first time in her life, she had a home, a protector, and a life she could truly call her own. The ranch had become more than a place. It was a sanctuary, a symbol of survival, and a testament to the power of care, resilience, and human connection. And Clara Dawson, once alone and nearly lost in the storm, had emerged not just alive, but thriving, loved, and finally free.